Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Mace. I'm coming to you from North America, the good part, in Canada. I'm on Vancouver Island in British Columbia, to be specific. And today's video, why is European rail so good? I assume this is being framed as European rail being so good in comparison to North American rail. The thumbnail, I believe, had on the United States, rail network Amtrak. Let's get into it. Canada also, our rail network's not that great. I think they're trying to add some maybe high-speed rail or relatively high-speed rail in Ontario. And I have to say, just for my personal experience, where we live here on the island, rail is essentially non-existent. Pretty much non-existent. Like if we want to go down to Victoria, which is over 200 kilometers away, you have to drive. You might be able to take a bus, but yeah, most people are going to drive. Like there's no rail network option. If you want to go from Vancouver across Canada, you can do that, but it's not necessarily cost efficient to do that. It's more of a tourist trap type of thing. It's not like something people are going to use as an economically viable option to travel. Anyways, let's get to this. Why is European rail so good?
Americans often look at the European passenger rail system with envy, as in comparison with Amtrak, it often seems in a class of its own. But how did it get so good? With a variety of different systems in different EU member states, spanning from national carriers to private low-cost carriers and luxury carriers, there are hundreds of different possibilities for what train to take. Their system of keeping everything connected and in sync is a fantastic achievement, and it exemplifies perfectly how Europe mastered the balance between the private railroads and the public railroads that the US has had such a hard time dealing with. Original railroad development in Europe was very scattered, as railways were developed without a common standard, often only to achieve one specific purpose in a country.
Yeah, I think a common standard is important. And listen, you can make excuses all day for why the North American, and it's not just transit, it's public transit in general, is poor, especially outside of metropolitan areas. Now, like I said, you can make excuses for this all day long. Canada and the United States, for that matter, are massive. They're huge in comparison to Europe. And there is, I think, something to be said for that. We also have, this separation of geographical areas and not much cooperation, whereas I think Europe does a much better job of that. The EU and also EU states, I think they just do a better job of making things more streamlined, whereas Canada, US, we're going to have a lot of disagreements in things across provinces, across states. Also, the geographies are much different. And listen, like I said, all excuses. But I do think the sheer size of Canada can't be discounted.
However, in 1842, the first international railroad opened between Belgium and France, and that set the stage for what is now one of the most diverse systems in the world. At this time, trains were all running on different gauge tracks. Many were not connected, and the companies who owned each train and track were often unwilling to work with one another. One of the most famous examples of this is the past of the London Underground, where several companies simultaneously developed their own transit networks, often clashing with one another over territory, routes, and stations. This may be a full video in the future, so please subscribe if you're interested in hearing more about that, and let me know what you think about it down in the comments. There is still a problem today, and it has been an even greater problem when it comes to electrification. Different voltages and styles have been built with little rhyme or reason across the continent, some using direct current and some using alternating current. But Europe is solving this with their new high-speed rail integrated system. High-speed rail has...
And even these high-speed rail networks, like, they don't go everywhere in Europe, right? Only major city centers, like...
solved a lot of these problems for Europe, as they have begun to regulate...
Like, look at that train. That train station is incredible. I don't know if many North American train stations can compare to the complexity and just how large this rail station is. That's cool.
To make sure that they can, in fact, complete their high-speed rail goals. They require a standard level of electrification and a standard track gauge by order of the EU, and this has solved a ton of issues. Whenever countries are laying new tracks, they have to follow this standard, excluding Russia, who still use broad gauge tracks because they're not in the EU proper, and they tend to ignore most of their legislation. All new railroads in Europe are also required to use the European Train Control System, which is a signaling and control system to guarantee a common level of safety, information, and operation. This has been able to promote better cross-border traffic as well. This has increased economic development, tourism, and tons of other things, so EU legislators can point to that and prove that their system is increasing the quality of life and economics of every European country. Europe has also allowed for free competition on nationally owned tracks and privately owned tracks. They passed the Single European Railway Directive in 2012, which guaranteed every private rail company the ability to apply for and receive access to operate on EU country tracks. This competition has made it so that national carriers cannot rest on their laurels as a monopoly, as independent carriers could swoop in and cut them out at any time. The same goes for...
Smart. Increasing competition, increasing quality overall for the riders of the train.
Private carriers, as someone else can come along and gain permission to operate on their tracks. Obviously, they do have to pay to operate on those tracks, but it has to be a fair price. They can't just make it impossible to have people compete with them. The EU also has a set of standards for future electrification and track construction, which should guarantee interoperability between different carriers. Although there are ways around this, and it has proved a difficult and complex issue, especially as certain governments take issue with EU legislation and say that the European government is overreaching its power. However, most major European countries are following these legislations, and it has proved to be very successful overall.
So we talked about different EU states disagreeing with some of the quote-unquote overreach of the European Union, but the European Union as a whole, I think, is pretty incredible feat to have 27 states in agreement and to have all of these benefits, you know, ease of travel, ease of work, all of those things. Super, super impressive. Hasn't really been done before, really, right? It's relatively new, and it seems to be working pretty well so far. I would love to be able to travel to different countries without having to, jump through a bunch of hoops to get over there.
This promotion of free industry has sped up the rapid growth of high-speed rail in the continent. Wendover Productions has a fantastic video on this that I highly recommend you check out. I'll leave it linked in the source document in the description of my video, but I'll give you a few examples of this as well.
That car traffic looks like it's moving pretty slow. Typical.
One is in Spain, which currently has 3 competing high-speed rail carriers, all of which competing at very low costs in comparison to planes. Iryo is one of those, a low-cost rail operator. It doesn't have a ton of lines yet, but it connects several of the major cities in Spain together with cheap tickets starting at 18 euros. The competition between these railroads has forced them to innovate, leading to a high standard of customer satisfaction in the Spanish railroad system, and high qualities of service, speed, price, cleanliness, food, and more. Government incentives have also proven a very effective tactic at generating an increased standard of high-speed rail in Europe, with hundreds of billions being handed out to improve service, extend rail lines, purchase trains, and serve other places that do not currently have frequent service. So while there is still lots of work to be done, it covers a very impressive amount of territory, and their legislation is able to accomplish a ton, making it one of the best systems to ride on in the world. In comparison to the Chinese or Japanese services, it's not very good. But in comparison to Amtrak, it is incredible. That's not...
No mention of Canada in this video. And Canada's got 41 million, 42 million people. We have a massive country. But I do believe our public transit systems are severely lacking. And I don't know if there's anything to be really done about it, especially in areas where the population density is just not high. Like, I think there's 800,000 people, something like that, on Vancouver Island. The majority of them in the very southern part of the island near Victoria. The other parts of the island, like the population bases just aren't that big. Even then, like, the public transit systems are crap. Like, they're horrible. They're pretty decent in Victoria. They're good in Vancouver and like cities like Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto, Montreal. Like, they have good transit systems, but outside of those city centers, it's useless, essentially.
Not to say that European rail operators don't make mistakes. In fact, one very large mistake was when the Spanish rail carrier made a bit of a purchasing error and purchased trains that did not fit in their own tunnels. If you're interested...
Oops. Yeah, that'd be not good. All right, see you guys in the next one. My name is Mace. I'm coming to you from Canada, and yeah, I also make music. You can find that on Spotify and all of that stuff. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.